What's up? So we are back again to talk about another armor set. This is one that nobody has requested, but I wanted to talk about because I think it fits into a really interesting place in terms of a player's progression building their bank up. And that is going to be the Masori armor set. The head, legs, and body, we're going to lump them all together and talk about them as a whole. I think it kind of makes sense to do it that way. And we'll just jump right into it. Let's start by getting out of the way how important this armor set is with a twisted bow. I say to get this out of the way because, like, it's really self-explanatory to say that, like, if you have a twisted bow, you want to get Masori because, like, it's a good upgrade for your twisted bow. We're going to talk about Masori in this video, mostly assuming that you do not have a twisted bow, because I think that's where it gets a lot more subjective and unclear as to whether Masori is something that's worth buying. Depends heavily on your situation, so we'll get, like, a lot more interesting conversation out of that. I think that's also going to be relevant for a lot more players, because a lot of players don't own a twisted bow. But let's get out of the way how important Masori is for a twisted bow. And the answer is it's very important. Like, Masori is... Twisted Bow has this habit, because it has a huge weapon multiplier, of getting multiple max hits anytime you give it, like, range strength bonus. Because the Masori set gives you range strength bonus, unlike any other ranged armor set in the game, it gives T-Bow a lot of max hits. So if we hit my combat dummy here, that's an 81 with the set on, and then if we take the set off, that is a 77. As you can see, it's 4 max hit difference to have the Masori set on. Like, and you can see it's not going to be as severe with my Zerite crossbow. Like, this will be a 50, and then I'll take the set off, and we'll hit for a 48. So yeah, it gives you, like, T-Bow has this habit of getting multiple max hits when you give it max hits. So as a result, the Masori set is really, really good with the twisted bow, and you want to try to get it sooner rather than later after you get a twisted bow. But now let's start talking about Masori more in general. I think this would be a good time to go ahead and take a look at the header. So, the Masori armor set, in case you didn't know, the fortified version is 140 mil as of November 2025. I've got the price of each individual item listed here, as well as the price of their unfortified version underneath that. As you can see, the unfortified version is, like, less than half as expensive these days. I guess there's not a lot of people doing Armadil, which isn't surprising. It kind of sucks to do Armadil. So yeah, it could save you a lot of money if you could buy the unfortified version. We're going to talk about that here in a minute. And down at the bottom, you've got the stats versus Black D'hide and a Carol's Coif. If you're curious about, like, Huey Codal D'hide or Carol's, in terms of offensive bonuses, Huey Codal Hide and Carol's are equivalent to Black D'hide. They just have better defensive bonuses. Armadil armor has, like, an extra 2 or 3 ranged attack over Black D'hide, but other than that, it's the same. It doesn't have any ranged strength bonus, and it just has more defense bonuses. So yeah, but if you look at the offensive stats here, you can see Masori gives you a lot of accuracy. And then it also gives you range strength, unlike any other armor in the game, really, which is obviously, like, really important and good because it gives you maxed hits on your ranged weapons. So I mentioned that we were going to talk about the fortified versus unfortified version. When we go to our main slide here, we'll start over here on the left and we'll get into that discussion. So where does fortification matter? Fortification matters anytime you are tanking hits, or, like, taking unavoidable damage, or, like, taking hits off prayer. So the main places where this really comes into play is at Nex, Corporeal Beast, Grotesque Guardians, Zulrah, and then Ulm, Tightrope, and Mudadile. These are the main places I could think of, and these are all Chambers rooms, in case you didn't know, which is why I lumped them together. These are the main places I could think of where you're using ranged and you're taking damage that rolls against your defense. So as a result, your fortification matters here. In case you didn't know, the unfortified version of Masori has, like, worse defensive bonuses than Black D'hide, so it's, like, really, really frail. But it is the exact same in terms of offensive bonuses. So, like, your accuracy and your max hits are going to be the exact same in Masori fortified versus unfortified. The unfortified just has worse defense bonuses. So where does fortification not matter as much? Places where the damage is avoidable or static. So this is TOA everywhere except for Akka. At TOA, it doesn't matter at all. unless you're like messing up and taking hits off prayer. It's true for all these places that if you're messing up and taking hits off prayer, obviously your fortification comes into play then, but you're going to die pretty quickly if you're doing that at most of these places, so we kind of have to assume that you're not, and that you're doing the mechanics correctly, and in those situations, the fortification will not matter. At Akka, the chip damage isn't very much these days, so that's mostly not a big deal, and then all the other rooms, it just flatly doesn't matter. Hydra, again, if you're doing the mechanics correctly, doesn't matter at all. Except for the first hit of the fight, where you can't predict which style it's going to hit you with. Muspa, excuse me, Muspa, all the phases except for the very last phase when you're after Smite phase, it doesn't matter. Doom, again, it only matters if you're taking hits off prayer, and you're going to die very quickly if you're doing that at Doom, so we kind of have to assume you're not. And then Vespula, the damage is static. Vasa, again, unless you're taking rocks, it doesn't matter. And Shamans, you're praying against the main attack they're hitting you with. So, yeah. And then Leviathan, again, it's avoidable. So over here on the right, I thought this would be the best and most sensible way to break down this discussion, which is to talk about the places where Elite Void is better than Masori or Crystal, the places where Masori is better than Bofa, and the places where Bofa is better than Masori. Because the main thing that I think makes Masori really interesting and subjective in terms of how it fits into a player's progression is that it really like competes with Bofa, because Bofa doesn't use Masori. Bofa pretty much has to have crystal armor or it doesn't really function well. So as a result, you're not going to use Masori when you're using Bofa. So if you're a player who owns a Bofa, then, you know, Masori is going to get edged out at a lot of places for you. I'll give you my TLDR for how where I think Masori fits in off the top, is that if you have a lot of spare money laying around, it is nice to have both, because it gives you the most coverage at the most places, and there are places where different options are better. But if you're a non-Bofa owner trying to skip Bofa, Masori is a nice upgrade for you. I'd say it's not really necessary to skip Bofa, but it definitely helps because it pushes your damage up quite a lot in the places where you're using range. And then if you're a Bofa owner, Masori becomes a rather niche item for you that you don't really need as much. But again, if you have like more money than you know what to do with for a given point in time, it would still be nice to have. You know, there's still reason to have both, but it's a lot more niche for you if you do own a Bofa. So let's start by talking about where Elite Void is better than Masori and Crystal. If in all three of these locations, if you don't have Elite Void, Masori is the better option as opposed to Crystal, but really you should just bite the bullet and go get your freaking Elite Void already. Everyone had to do it, I'm sorry, but it is what it is. Because at these locations, Elite Void is quite a bit better than Masori or Crystal. If you don't know how Masori breaks down versus Elite Void, Masori is more accurate than Elite Void, but Elite Void gives you more max hits. So at these locations, those max hits matter more than the extra accuracy. So that's Vorkath. When you're using a Dragon Hunter crossbow, Elite Void is better. At Taub, like, stuff is super frail at Taub, doesn't have very much defense, at least the stuff that you range. So as a result, we go with the Elite Void because the max hits matter more than the accuracy. And at Doom, this is kind of up for debate, but during the car phase, you do have 100% accuracy, so Elite Void is definitely better. But outside of car phase, the Masori is better because it gives you more accuracy in a time where accuracy is actually making a difference. So there are some people who like to run Masori over Elite Void at Doom, but for the most part, people run Elite Void because damage during car phase tends to matter a little bit more. As well as the fact that Elite Void is free to die with, whereas Masori costs quite a bit of money to die with, so as a result, Elite Void helps you keep death fees down at Doom, a place where it's really easy to die. So over here, in the middle, we've got places where Masori is greater than Bofa. And obviously, these are all places where we're assuming you don't have a Twisted Bow. If you do have a Twisted Bow, a lot of these places, you're going to want to use Masori Twisted Bow over a Bofa or any of these weapons. But yeah, we're assuming you don't have a Twisted Bow for pretty much this entire discussion. So, Masori greater than Bofa, using either a Blowpipe, a Dragon Crossbow, or a Dragon Hunter Crossbow. Oh yeah, and I didn't talk about here at the top. And the use cases of Masori are obviously anytime you use range, and then also Corp and Nex. A lot of times you use a Fang or a Nox Halberd on Corp and a Fang on Nex. Even when you're using those melee weapons on Nex, a lot of people, especially in smaller teams, tend to wear Masori over like melee armor because these bosses attack you with magic. And Masori has really good magic defense, so it helps you avoid taking a lot of damage at those bosses. Anyways, so Blowpipe, Dragon Crossbow, or Dragon Hunter Crossbow are the weapons that we're going to talk about here. Obviously, a Dragon Hunter Crossbow is just flatly better than a Dragon Crossbow in all situations, but it's a lot more expensive. So we're only going to talk about the Dragon Hunter Crossbow where it's specifically noted, and that's where we're fighting dragons, so it becomes very important that we're talking about that specific weapon. So the first two places here are Nex and Leviathan. These two places are unique because these are bosses that are specifically weak to heavy range. They're weaker to bolts than they are to arrows from a bow. And we don't have like a crystal crossbow in the since we don't have like a crystal crossbow in the game, obviously Masori is the better option because you can use that with a crossbow and have it benefited a lot more. So at these bosses, because you are using heavy range, like Leviathan for example, before they did, I have a lot of DPS calculations pulled up here. We'll parse our way through some of these as we talk about it. But like at Leviathan, before the range defense split, and he was just as weak to arrows as bolts, it used to be that Bofa and Zerite Crossbow were like almost the same. But now, because he's weaker to bolts than arrows, as you can see, it's 9% better to use a Dragon Crossbow on Leviathan with Ruby Bolts. Quite a bit better. And by the way, the Twisted Buckler comes before the Masori. It gives you more strength bonus for like the amount that it costs. So like you want to get the Twisted Buckler before you get the Masori. So if you have the Masori but not the Twisted Buckler, you kind of did things in the wrong order. I would just like backtrack a little bit and get yourself a Twisted Buckler somehow. It's not very expensive. It's like 14 mils. So yeah, but it's really good. And then Nex, obviously, like at Nex, it's weaker to heavy range, so you want to be using bolts over arrows. And then where's my Nex calculations? So yeah, as you can see, it's 7.5% better to use. Oh, this is a comparison of Masori versus Black D'hide. If you're curious how much of an upgrade it is for you to use the Masori over the Black D'hide at Nex, it is a 7.5% difference in favor of the Masori set. And then it also results in you taking a little over 6% less damage from Nex. So yeah, pretty solid upgrade. And then at Zulrah, Blowpipe is actually best in slot. In max, it's a little bit better than a T-bow. So as a result, it obviously wins over a Bofa at Zulrah. I've got Zulrah pulled up here somewhere. Yeah, as you can see, Amethyst Darts here. Oh, that's not the right comparison. Oh, that's a Masori comparison. But yeah, if we plug in Bofa here, you'll see that. Plug it in real quick. You'll see that Blowpipe is quite a bit better on Zulrah. It's about 5% over the Bofa. So yeah, a fair bit better. And then I thought I had another calculation pulled up for Zulrah here, but yeah. And then also, if you are using like Black D'hide, by the way, this is like 8 to 9% worse than a Masori set. The Masori set matters a lot for the Blowpipe because max hits and accuracy matter a lot for Blowpipe. So if you don't have Masori, Blowpipe is actually worse than Bofa at Zulrah. But if you do have Masori, Blowpipe is quite a bit better than Bofa at Zulrah. At Hydra, both Dragon Hunter Crossbow and Blowpipe and Masori are better than a Bofa by quite a lot, actually. I've got a Hydra calculation pulled up here somewhere. Sorry, I know I'm doing a lot of this, but I have so many open. So this is just Blowpipe with Amethyst Darts, and as you can see, it's 12.5% better than Bofa. That's like a huge gap, it's way better. And then if we make it a Dragon Hunter Crossbow, which is even better than Blowpipe at Hydra, yeah, as you can see, it's going to be like 20% better, 19% better. So yeah, Dragon Hunter Crossbow and Blowpipe both destroy Bofa at Hydra. And then at Ulm, obviously you're going to want to use a Dragon Hunter Crossbow at Ulm if you don't have a T-bow. That's the second best option, and obviously it's going to benefit more from Masori than Crystal. And then Akka and Akka's Shadows. Blowpipe is the best in slot ranged weapon at Akka and Akka's Shadows, period. like it's better than T-bow. And on Aka's shadows, blowpipe is actually like equivalent to a shadow. It's best in slot. It's like tied with shadow. So both on Aka and Aka's shadows, you're going to benefit more from having Masori because it's going to help your blowpipe hit them harder. TOA as a whole, we're going to talk about as kind of subjective in terms of which one you bring, and this next discussion is going to hint at that here. Places where Bofa is greater than Masori. So P1 Warden, that's the Obelisk, P2 Warden, P4 Warden. At all of these places, Bofa is quite a bit better than Masori. We've got the Obelisk pulled up here. As you can see, Bofa's 11% better than the Dragon Crossbow, so that's quite a bit. And it's a similar margin at P2, and then it's about 5% better at P4. Then at Chambers, when we're talking about the actual rooms at Chambers and not Ulm itself, Crystal and Bofa tends to beat Masori. Tightrope, that's definitely true. Vespula, Bofa's like equivalent to T-bow, so yeah, it's really good on Vespula Portal. And then Vasa, yeah, Bofa's gonna win over Masori in all of those locations, barring you having a T-bow. I got some of those pulled up here. Like, here's Bofa versus T-bow on the Abyssal Portal. As you can see, it's only a 1% difference. And then here is Vasa. Obviously, Bofa's a lot better because Vasa's super tanky. Bofa's a really accurate weapon, so it tends to excel versus other weapons on tanky bosses. Vasa's a really tanky boss, so Bofa wins by like 9%. And on Tightrope, like the Deathly Mage, Bofa wins by like 19% over a Dragon Hunter crossbow. So yeah, it's like a huge margin. And then at Shamans and Muttadile, if you brought a blowpipe and used that with Masori, that would beat Bofa in these rooms. But it's very uncommon to bring a blowpipe into Chambers, and also using a blowpipe to kill Shamans would be a nightmare. That'd be a huge pain in the ass. At Muttadile, it's like kind of viable though. A lot of people like to run that layout where you're just doing Muttadile, Tecton, and then either Shamans, Guardians, or Mystics as the last combat room. So as a result, they don't do Vespula, they don't do Vasa, they don't do like most of the rooms in the raid. And the only places where you'd use range would be at Shamans, at Muttadile, and potentially at Tightrope. So in that situation, maybe it would make sense to bring a blowpipe. I still wouldn't want to use it on Shamans, but yeah, just for Muttadile specifically, because like the inventory space usually doesn't matter until Ulm, and you could just put it in your private for Ulm. But yeah, I still think it's a little bit weird to bring a blowpipe. It would be a little like, people would raise an eyebrow at you bringing a blowpipe in. And I think that, in general, like my big takeaway for Chambers is that I think if you own both a Bofa set and a Masori set, it makes the most sense when you're doing CMs to bring the Crystal and Bofa, and then a Dragon Hunter crossbow for Ulm that you're just going to use with your Crystal at Ulm. And then in regulars, because of what I said about the specific layout you do, there's a little bit more room for subjectivity, but I would still mostly recommend the same thing. And then for Bandos, Zami, Kree, and Ziliana, Bofa destroys Masori, and barring a TiVo at all of these locations, because again, they're very, very tanky monsters. I have those DPS calculations pulled up here. As you can see, it's 28% at Bandos over a Dragon Crossbow. Oh, it doesn't have a buckler, but it's still a huge margin. 10% at Ziliana, 13% at Kree. What's the last one? Krill. And then at Krill, it's 20%. So yeah, obviously Bofa is way better than Dragon Crossbow at those places. The only places where Masori would be better, even if you had a TiVo, would be Kree and Ziliana. And they're like even equal at Kree. At Ziliana, the TiVo's better, but at Kree, they're like almost equal. So yeah, Bofa does really well against God War's dungeon bosses because they're really tanky. And then these are the places where Masori basically equals Bofa. That's Muspa, Zabak, and P3 Warden. So I've got Zabak pulled up here. They're within 2% of each other, and that's like, it even flips. Like, this is with a ranging potion, and if you give him salts, it flips to where both is 2% better. But with a ranging potion, the crossbow is 2% better. So I pretty much consider that equivalent. So yeah, it's a back, Dragon Crossbow, and Masori versus Bofa, pretty much equal. And then at Warden P3, yeah, they're again within 2% of each other. So I pretty much consider that equal. So yeah, these are two locations where Bofa has a reputation of being a lot better, but it's actually pretty much equivalent. And then at Muspa, yeah, again, they're pretty much equal. I've got that calculation pulled up here too. The Dragon Crossbow is about 2% better, a little bit less, but yeah, I pretty much consider that equivalent. So my main takeaway at TOA is that Bofa is a better option for TOA as a whole, but Dragon Crossbow with Masori and Blowpipe is still like definitely viable to run TOA with. Like it's not even like too much less viable than Bofa, a little bit, and it's going to be a little bit slower, but it's not like a huge deal. Like if you have Masori Dragon Crossbow, like your Dragon Crossbow is going to do decently during the raid. But Bofa is a better option at TOA versus a Masori Dragon Crossbow. And that's my main takeaway for TOA. So yeah, we've pretty much summed up the TOA and Cox and like all the monsters now. So again, just to repeat my TLDR that I said earlier, I think that if you are a Bofa owner, Masori is a rather niche item for you, but it is useful at some places. If you are a Bofa skipper, then Masori is a really nice upgrade for you that's going to help you at a ton of places. And if you are somebody who like owns them both, you didn't really make a wrong decision because like it does give you more coverage and more benefits to have both of them. Like there's places where you'll use either of them potentially. So yeah, it is like a set that's decent. It's just like if you're a Bofa owner, I think it does get edged out at a lot of places, and that's what kind of makes it subjective. If I was building my bank up today, I would probably just go for Bofa, and I would put Masori off until after I got Tebow. I probably wouldn't buy it because it is like quite niche if you do own a Bofa, but it is, you know, still somewhat helpful. So if you own a Bofa and you also own a Masori set but no Tebow, you're not really in the wrong. Like it's just like the Masori set's obviously a bit more niche for you than it would be if you didn't have a Bofa. It's rather niche, but it's still, you know, it's probably money that you're just saving up for a mega rare anyways. So yeah, what else were you going to spend it on? So that's my main take on the Masori armor. I hope it was helpful to you, and I will see you in the next one.